core question that I'm asking right now is, how does a senior leader enable speed of execution all the way down into the organization? Because I don't have to convince you that speed is critical at this moment, that the pace of change, the sheer volume of disruptions, in fact, the statistical number of transformations happening in large organizations has gone from in 2016 2 a year to 10 a year. It's not just how do we decide what those disruptions are, it's actually how do we ensure that the people responsible for executing it aren't the biggest sources of resistance to it. And what actually happens inside of the senior leadership team that will enable that, and then how do senior leaders all the way down enable their individual teams to operate at pace. And this is particularly challenging because many of the ways that we think about organizations as an entity all but ensure that that type of operating rhythm is elusive at best, but nearly impossible. And the reason is because classically, organizations were built based on reducing risk of human error, right? And the best way to reduce risk is to ensure that those below you don't have to make decisions, which, by the way, they're comfortable with also, because there's no better way to feel job security than to not feel responsibility for a bad decision. And so it feels acutely risky to shift the operating patterns so that people can operate in a way that they are forced to make decisions and to operate at speed, sometimes with different information than you would have, and making different decisions than you would make. But what I would suggest is that the risk of a more hierarchical decision, top-down decision-making approach has systemic risks that outweigh any risk that occurs from someone making a wrong decision down into the organization. I'm particularly interested in the question of how do you as a leader operate in a way that allows your organization and your teams to accelerate without burning yourself out in the process. And this isn't just about like holding hands and singing Kumbaya and feeling really good at the end of the day. It's actually mission critical for performance. There is nothing that I have seen more damaging to an organization than a leader who's unhealthy. And this plays out in a lot of different ways. But maybe most acutely, that when a leader's unhealthy, they don't actually give others the permission to give them the information that they need that would be mission critical for making effective decisions. And to be clear, there is no incentive for any member of your team who reports to you or reports like a few steps down from you to ever tell you what you don't want to hear. Because if they tell you what you don't want to hear, they are risking not just making the boss unhappy, but they're risking their livelihood, their families, their benefits, their mortgage. And so the question is, how do you operate internally in such a way that enables and encourages people to share information with you that in fact is otherwise risky, that they're not going to share? And how do you do it in such a way that ensures that the consequences are higher when they withhold and the rewards are bigger when they actually feel like they are inserting their voice into the conversation? And this is fundamentally driven by an understanding that in a world that has constantly new information, inputs, data that profoundly can impact your specific business, and you don't have the capacity to stay on top of all of it. As a leader, it is your job to be looking further out, and so to be seeing what potential trends can shape the direction of your customers, shape the direction of your workforce. But even that, if you spent all day just reading everything that was out there about these very subjects, you wouldn't have time to do anything else, and you still wouldn't even barely get just a 1/100th of what's available on New York Times website alone, right? And so there's a way that we can respond to this. And the problem is that it is actually counter to the way that we will naturally respond to an environment of rapid change, of constant disruption, of accelerating speed. And the reason that it's counter is because when we live in an environment of constant uncertainty, we are naturally going to respond as if we're experiencing threats, stress. We want to lock it down. In fact, the more experience you have, the more likely you are to reject that information. This is called crystallized intelligence. We reject information, we project strength, which often is a function of actual insecurity and fear. And so there's all sorts of things biologically working against you, creating an environment that your team has the psychological safety. And the fascinating study out of Google on the power of psychological safety in enabling high-performance teams, there's infinite reasons that you would not actually create that environment. There's two layers that we have to account for when we look at the major macro trends that are shaping every aspect of work, from the relationship we have with employers to the relationship we have with brands that we associate, meaning that we give money to. And I think the one that we hear a lot about is, what are the coming trends? Biotech, you gotta be on top of the way that technology is changing health and lifespan. AI, depending on who you talk to, it's either a fad that is way overstated, or it might make all of us have no jobs, right? And the truth is that you could hire me or anyone like me to give you an informed opinion about that, but I think it actually misses the more critical discussion around how macro trends can shape and redefine the way that your teams and your organization interacts. And that's not which trends do you need to be on top of at this moment, because I can tell you a decade in, they keep changing. The more critical question is, how are you building a team, a culture, a leadership expectation that you will be able to identify, respond to, and actually benefit from the micro trends that will shape and reshape the particular place that you occupy. And that has far less to do with being able to identify whether you should be on Gemini or ChatGPT. It has far more to do with the culture that is being created around new information and how we receive the need and the implications of potentially disruptive ways of operating among each other, right? And so what I find most interesting about the conversation around trends is one, to be aware and to spotlight trends that are impacting your space, but even more, it's to say, are we operating and are we developing our people in a way that makes them not just capable of seeing trends, but excited about them and bringing them to the company so that the teams can actually enact the change that is needed as a function of these trends. Because a lot of the trends that we see, I'll give biotech for instance, this is going to profoundly change the way that we all live. The truth is, most businesses today have no idea what to do with biotech. Or generational differences, demographics trends, changes in the relationship that different people have with what's normal, what's rude, what's polite, what's expected, how we communicate, who we interact with, where we want to work, all of those important. And also, you have specific people at your company that are specific ages with different expectations, and far less than what's happening on a macro level is, how do we make sure that we know what the micro people that we have need in order to be able to do their jobs well? And how do you, as a leader who has asymmetric power among compared to someone who's younger with less experience, but also may lack information and data points that they can bring, how do you create their incentive to share with you what may in fact run against the way that you're thinking about it?